All right, I think we're going to gavel in. Is every counselor? All right, I'll just note for my council colleagues that your videos are mostly off, which is fine, but I would encourage people, if possible, when you are asking questions, to turn them on. All right, why don't we get going? Oh, I lent my gavel to somebody, so I got to get it back. Right now, this is what I've got. I'm gaveling this hearing of the Boston City Council into session. For the record, my name is Kenzie Bach. I'm the District 8 City Councilor, and I'm the chair of the Boston City Council Committee on Ways and Means. I'm joined here today by Councilor Michael Flaherty at large, Councilor Michelle Wu at large, Councilor Anissa Sabi-George at large, Council President Kim Janey, District 7, and Councilor Matt O'Malley, District 6. I imagine some of our other colleagues will join us as well. Just for folks watching at home, well, if you're watching at home, you already know that this public hearing is being recorded and live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv. It will be rebroadcast on Comcast Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, Verizon Channel 1964. The Council's FY21 budget review will encompass around 27 hearings over roughly 6 weeks, as well as 9 councilor working sessions. So we just had our kickoff of the budget season this morning with an overview from Administration and Finance, and now we'll be hearing from the Assessing Department and talking a bit more about revenue. We strongly encourage residents, whether you want to do this in live or by sending in testimony, to take a moment to engage with this process. So one of the options is to write to ccc.wm@boston.gov with your written testimony. You can attach a 2-minute video of testimony, and you can find on our website ways to do that. There's a form. Or you can attend one of these virtual hearings over Zoom. The Zoom link is attached to the public hearing notice, and we will let folks in from the waiting room to testify at the end of each hearing. We will ask everybody to state your name and residence and keep your comments to a few minutes in that case. I also just want to highlight that this Thursday we'll be having at 6 p.m. a public testimony dedicated hearing, which will really be focused on raising everyone's questions and concerns going into the budget season, having had a chance to hear from the initial presentations. So I would encourage members of the public who might want to help frame the conversation for the council to attend and raise your questions at that hearing this Thursday evening at 6. We'll also be having 2 further dedicated public testimony hearings towards the end of the process, May 26th and May 28th, both at 6 p.m. And you can also informally tweet us your questions using the hashtag BOSBudget, BossBudget. Members of my staff will be monitoring that. It's not a formal form of submitting testimony, but we'll definitely be watching that. And finally, more information on the whole budget process for the council and how to testify, you can find at boston.gov/council-FY21Budget. And the city's proposed budget itself, you can find at budget.boston.gov. With that, let's move to today's hearing. So today's hearing is on Dockets 0588-0590, orders for the FY21 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations, for the school department, and for other post-employment benefits. Dockets 0591-0592, orders for capital fund transfer appropriations, and dockets 0593-0596, orders for the capital budget, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. Those are the docket numbers for all of the budget-related dockets that we'll be considering over the next couple of months. Our hearing today is focused on revenue and assessing specifically. We are joined by the city's commissioner for the assessing department, Nick Arnella, and I guess the thing that I would say is that we're going to be having a series of budget hearings throughout April and chiefly actually May, where we look at the ways that we budget for spending and we think about how we might need to adjust that given the present crisis. All of those budgets about how to spend the money will be dependent on the answer to the question of what revenues we as a city can count on in the coming fiscal year. And so we addressed that somewhat in this morning's hearings, and we'll be continuing on that topic this afternoon. So with that, I'd like to recognize Commissioner Arnello to make an opening statement. The assessing department has also sent over materials to the council, and then we'll jump into some questions. So thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you so much for having me here. For record, my name is Nick Arnello. I'm the Commissioner of Assessing for the City of Boston. I'm here today to present the fiscal year 2021 budget recommendations for the assessing department. The department is responsible for maintaining ownership data and determining the fair cash value of over 180,000 real estate and personal property accounts every year. Fiscal year 20, we generated $2.5 billion in revenue for the city from those property taxes alone. The department is also responsible for assessing motor vehicle and boat excise, administering property tax contracts, and administering the nonprofit payment in lieu of tax program. The department is facing many challenges in this upcoming fiscal year 2021. The ongoing challenge of determining fair cash values for the property throughout the city, and that is a challenge that I don't think is going to be any easier with our ongoing pandemic. This upcoming year is also a recertification year with the Department of Revenue. That comes with heightened standards and requirements that are placed upon the department. Recertification, so every year our values are certified by the Department of Revenue. Recertification is a special process. It used to happen every 3 years. There were some changes to that timeline in the Commonwealth statutes. And so the last one that we had was in fiscal year 2016. So that is quite an undertaking that we have ahead of us. We're projecting $2.6 billion in property tax revenue for the upcoming fiscal year. At that level, we will be at the Proposition 2.5 limit, and that has been the city's practice since Proposition 2.5 went into effect in 1982. And this is projected to be 72% of the overall budget for the city. The department is very concerned with accuracy levels and proactively addressing concerns of taxpayers. That's pretty much our main mission, is to make sure our values are right and then get that information out to people so they understand where our values are coming from. One of the challenges that, one of the challenges we faced this past fiscal year was converting to a new software system for our valuation modeling and data collection. That went well, thankfully. It was a large-scale project. As I said, we have over 180,000 parcels, and that we're valuing in a mass appraisal methodology. We had that system conversion approved by the Department of Revenue. We had our values certified, and then this year we received less than 1,300 abatement applications off of that new valuation system. That is an indicator that gives me a lot of comfort in how that software conversion went. No, I'm gonna assume that you guys have some questions for me, so go ahead, shoot.
Thank you, Commissioner. I guess if we could start with, you referenced the fact that it's a revaluation year, and I'm curious to know what that process usually looks like mechanically, and how the mechanics of that process could be affected by this current situation. So, as an untutored person, my first thoughts would be, first of all, that the question of having assessors go out and about might be impacted by our public health situation. And then, I don't know to what extent you all use comps in that process, but the question of what to do when a real estate market has stalled with your kind of comps aspect of the process is something I'm curious about. So I'll just lead off with that question for now and then start recognizing my colleagues.
So those are two excellent questions. I definitely have a concern. A large part of our maintenance is sending assessors to the field. And in the current environment and not knowing how long this is going to last, that we are trying to have social distancing and have fewer people out and about, that is going to become harder and harder for us to meet the standard requirements that we have to say that we've been looking at all these properties. I intend to have conversations with the Department of Revenue about ways to address that through technology. We were lucky enough to implement another new software program last year that It's kind of a drive-by system. It's a little similar to using Google Street View, in which we send around cars with cameras on all the city streets. It's more comprehensive than Google Street View. So when you're looking at that imaging system, you can kind of scroll up and down. You can use it to measure the exteriors of properties because it uses a LiDAR, a laser measuring system when they're taking the photos. And so hopefully we can kind of leverage that system and get the Department of Revenue to give us a little leeway there. Ideally, we would still have people on the streets, and that is something that we're going to have to figure out a way to make that happen and do that safely, but also meeting the time requirements that we have for the recertification. To your second question about comps. Comps are a big part of our model. One of the things that I think is helpful for this upcoming budget cycle is the timeline on which property taxes are assessed. So for fiscal year 2021, the valuation date that we are looking at is January 1st, 2020. And so that uses calendar year 2019 transaction data. So I believe this morning, Justin and Emma might have mentioned that the concern about market transactions kind of impacting property values is not as much of a fiscal year 21 concern as it is a fiscal year 2022 concern. Which is not to say that it is not a concern. It is definitely a large concern. If we don't have enough transaction data, it's going to be a problem. It's not a 21 problem, it's a 22 problem.
Got it. Thank you so much. Let me jump right into recognizing colleagues for questions. And I should say we've also been joined by Councillor Andrea Campbell from District 4, Councillor Ricardo Arroyo from District 5, Councillor Julia Mejia at large, and Councillor Frank Baker from District 3. But I'll start out by recognizing Councillor Michael Flaherty if you have any questions, with Councillor Wu up next.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, Nick. It's good to see you. I appreciate your responsiveness since taking over as the city's assessor. I know you've been super responsive to me and my staff, as well as to the council. So look forward to working through this budget with you, your first budget on the city of Boston. So welcome and best of luck. I know that you had mentioned 2.6 billion in property taxes, and I think a key component for you to be able to best do your job is predictability. And in light of what we're seeing here with requests to push back the property tax and on the collection side of the house, and you're saying it's more sort of a function of maybe 2022, I guess. What is it that we can do, or what will happen if we institute policies that continue to sort of push this further on down the road? What will that mean for future budgets? And I think this budget in particular has changed course over the last several weeks from when we sat down with the chair and the mayor's budget team till today. And so dramatically different in terms of sort of the wish list to what we're actually going to be able to accomplish, given what we're seeing across the board from housing, from public health, from public safety. So I guess what is it that we can be doing and what can we be proposing that will put you in the best position to help get our city out of this as we want to move our city forward?
That's an excellent question. Thank you, Councillor, and good afternoon to you as well. One of the really nice things about property taxes in the city of Boston, in understanding that no one likes taxes, no one is excited about paying taxes, and for the most part, I think that the vast majority of people kind of feel like any level of taxes, they'd prefer it to be lower. But that being said, with our residential exemption, with the shift that we have, shifting residential burden onto commercial property, we have comparatively very affordable and low tax bills compared to surrounding areas of the Commonwealth. And honestly, even the commercial rate is not that bad compared with some surrounding areas. And so I think that affordability and the push that the city council and the administration has had to have that residential exemption be maxed out at 35%, to have that shift from residential to commercial value be maxed out every year. Those measures are the kinds of measures that make it easier for people to weather this kind of storm. And those will hopefully be a big help. It's the help of consistency. And to your point about things that we might be able to do going forward, I know that a lot of what kind of helps people and businesses be able to plan for the future is to know what kind of fixed costs are. And to an extent, that is what property taxes are. That's one of the things that Proposition 2.5 does, is it kind of makes it so that the city's budget can't wildly jump up and down from year to year. It puts limits in place, and I think that those are good limits, and that we should kind of be respectful of those payment dates and those limits to allow the city to continue to provide services and allow the city to plan, but also to allow taxpayers to kind of plan for what's ahead.
Nick, if I may just interject, one of the things that and I sound like a broken record, I know my colleagues can attest to it over the last couple of weeks, when we've been getting a lot of pressure to look for ways to provide relief, rental relief, mortgage relief, property tax relief, and recognizing that a lot of our property tax is baked into via the escrow portion of one's mortgage. But I've been suggesting, and I'm hoping other leaders will do the same, that this pandemic is impacting people in many different ways. Clearly, we have a significant portion of our population that will be devastated. But for some others, city employees, state employees, Massport, MBTA, our public health officials, they're not missing a beat in terms of they're going to continue to get a check, coupled with the fact that in some instances, some folks are getting time and a half, they're getting overtime, they're getting bonus time. So this is going to impact people differently. What I'm suggesting, and maybe it's through the assessing department, if people have the ability to pay, if they have the ability to pay their rent, if they have the ability to pay their mortgage, if they have their ability to pay their property tax, that is essential, particularly in your space, in balancing predictability with the current crisis, in order to move us forward and to give our banks and our insurance companies the ability to do what they need to do to be able to lend and to cover folks that need it the most. We really need to implore those that don't have, that this pandemic hasn't impacted them financially. We need them to step up to the plate and not put themselves in the category of delaying the rent and delaying the mortgage and delaying the property tax payments. So I'd like to get your thoughts on ones. We should be putting means tests. We should be putting ability to pay tests on all of these policies that will eventually help our city be able to get out from underneath this and to get our economy back on track. Would like to get your thoughts on ability to pay versus lumping everybody in providing coverage, I guess, in policy when they have the ability to pay.
So that's an excellent point. I think one of the tricks with creating any sort of means test for ability to pay is that these things can be really complicated to kind of implement quickly. And so if you're looking for quick answers, which I think kind of happens when you have this kind of immediate crisis that we've been in, then the fastest way to implement a quick solution is to have it apply to everyone. But if you're looking for kind of a longer term solution, a longer term program, then that's the kind of thing where you can kind of take some time in deciding how you want to implement it best and kind of work through scenarios of who might be impacted depending on what the test is that you create. I know I spent a lot of time reviewing the recent legislation that was passed that extended the ability for the city to extend the payment date. It also extended, it did a couple of things that the mayor signed through executive order, and he signed the maximum allowed underneath the statutory change, underneath the new act. The first thing that it did was it moved the exemption deadline for residential and personal exemptions. So that was an April 1st deadline, and the mayor extended that to June 1st. So that's 2 extra months. That's something that's never happened before, to kind of give people an opportunity that were worried about getting applications in on time, or just maybe weren't thinking about it because there's so much going on in their lives, to kind of have some breathing space and get that material into us so that they can qualify for the programs that we already have that offer a lot of upside. The second thing that was in that legislation that the mayor enacted with his executive order was moving the fourth quarter real estate tax bill date a month from May 1st to June 1st. And that was something that definitely has an impact on the city and has an impact on our revenue, but also provides some relief. And the fact that didn't have a means test in it meant that we won't get bogged down in trying to figure out who qualifies and who doesn't. It's also a way for the city to kind of provide clear information out to the world of like, hey, this just applies to everybody. We're not going to make you go through this whole process of applications and reviewing income. It's just everybody gets an extra month. And then the third thing that kicked in with that executive order was there was an option for any tax bills, so like motor vehicle excise, that was due after March 10th, that there will not be interest and penalties assessed with that as long as it is paid by June 30th, which is the end of the fiscal year. And that was another way to kind of give everyone an opportunity to have a little relief, but not do anything devastating to the city's finances, so that we can keep functioning and make sure that, you know, our fire and policemen and emergency services are all getting paid.
Great. Thank you so much, Commissioner. And thank you, Councillor Flaherty. I'll just say again that we're going to try to keep these to 5-minute rounds, and then if we need to do another, we shall. I'll recognize now Councillor Michelle Wu at large, to be followed by Councillor Asabi George, and then President Janey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much, Commissioner. I knew Councillor Flaherty was going to ask that, so thank you to my colleague as well. And I think predictably, I'm going to ask what folks might guess that I was going to ask, which is around the further property tax deferral. You know, we have a hearing order on the books, and we'll work with my colleagues, our chair here, as well as Councillor Edwards, to find a time that works to talk in more detail about it, but just generally curious to get your thoughts on how that process would work. Let's say there is an opportunity or there's a determination that it makes sense to offer even more flexibility for a targeted group of property tax owners to defer even further than what has already been established. What would that mean logistically for your office, and you know, any other kind of big picture considerations around that?
Yeah, so if what you're thinking of is kind of a means-tested program like Councillor Flaherty was mentioning, logistically, if you implement something along those lines, and to be honest, I don't know if it would end up being my department or not. It would kind of depend on how it was set up, who would administer it. But for the moment, let's just assume it's my department, and I'll let you know how I would address it. Mm-hmm. So I think that there would be a lot of conversation where I would want to make sure that we are doing what we can to give people the benefit as quickly as possible, but then also make sure that we have enough documentation to vet them to make sure that they can get that benefit. And so that balancing act of asking for information to make sure that they fit into the category, but also trying to quickly have turnaround so that people can get that benefit early. Those two things are really, really tricky to kind of manage. I mean, a lot of this, the vast majority of our property taxes are paid through places that people who have mortgages on their home and have escrows. And so I think there's also a component there where deferring someone's property tax does not necessarily mean that the bank will defer how much money they need in escrow. And so I think that's also kind of challenging, where if you want to do something like that, it's important to make sure that the benefit is actually getting to that end homeowner. And that's kind of might be a little bit of a trick in that, where it seems like delaying might have value, but the person isn't paying the property taxes directly, and the bank is going to make them give them their money no matter what. You're not actually delaying any checks that people have to cut.
Yeah, along those lines, I want to make sure that the conversation that we're having is wider than just residential property owners as well, and that we know, for example, a lot of small business owners in this, or sorry, yes, a lot of small business owners in the city are tenants of their commercial spaces, and the lease arrangements will have the property taxes flowing down to the tenant. So in many businesses, for most right now, restaurants and others that have been either shut down altogether or are operating in a much reduced way. Do you have any thoughts on the commercial side in particular?
Yeah, so that's another good point that you bring that up, because that does kind of come with its own set of challenges. So most small businesses don't own their own space, right? Most of them, they have a landlord and they're paying taxes because that's what their lease says they have to do. And so that's another instance where if we delay collection on commercial property taxes, that's a delay for the owner. The owner might not be willing to modify their lease agreement with their tenants. Like, in essence, putting that change into effect doesn't necessarily pass through to the end tenants if the owner doesn't want it to. And so that is also another situation where it seems like there might be a benefit, but if you start to kind of work through the math of where that benefit accrues, it might just be that the property owner gets to keep their money in their investment account a little longer. Doesn't actually impact the schedule for the end business, and the city's revenue gets delayed. Not that that's good or bad, it's just trying to figure out who's going to benefit from different policies.
No, absolutely. And there's certainly lots to weigh on that. My final question, just switching gears a little bit, could you just summarize for us what your office has been hearing from folks? Are you getting a flurry of outreach in certain areas? Is it more confusion about how to, what the new timeframes are and what people can do? Is it folks reaching out saying they're not able to pay? What should they do? Just let us know kind of your constituent facing side. What are you hearing?
Yeah, no, there's been a lot of conversation this past week about kind of understanding the new tax deadlines. That has mostly come from the commercial side. There have been some people that have been appreciative of the extensions in the exemption applications. But for the most part, we haven't gotten a lot of contact from individual homeowners about the property tax extension. And that might honestly just be that the original due date is May 1st and we haven't kind of gotten there yet.
Yeah.
I know we've been working on putting information on various city web pages to kind of get the word out that we've made these changes so that people know that they can apply for these programs and that there have been these extensions.
Got it. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wu. I do want to note that we were joined a while back by Councillor Edwards of District 1 and Councillor Breeden of District 9. Next, recognizing Councillor Asabi George at large, to be followed by Councillor Kim Janey. Thanks.
Thank you, Chairman Bach, and thank you, Nick, for being with us this afternoon. I think you referenced it in some of your statements earlier around that computer-assisted mass appraisal, that CAMA, and we talked about it last year in our hearing. So I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit more about that and address the shifts in roles and staffing that has occurred with that change.
Sure. So, yep, we had, so CAMA, Computer Assisted Mass Appraisal. It's kind of a generic name for any software. So like a word processor is a generic name for Microsoft Word or Google Docs. So we had one CAMA provider that we were using for many years, I think since around 2000. And then we switched over to a new provider after a bidding process. And we implemented that kind of over the course of about the past year and a half. there were some significant challenges with that implementation. Basically, we're taking our entire database out of one kind of program and shoving it into another program, and the two programs don't really talk well with each other. It's, again, to kind of analogize to word processing, it's better now, but there used to be times where you would take a document in Microsoft Word and you'd open it up in another program and things look kind of screwy and the formatting doesn't match over. So it's similar kind of problems to that we're kind of going through and figuring out bugs and kind of squashing. The staffing changes, to the extent that there would be any, have not been recognized yet for that process. We're still doing a lot of testing. We're very happy with how values came out last year and how the program performed, but we'd still like it to perform a little better, and so we're going back and forth with the vendor to kind of make tweaks so it's more usable for us on a day-to-day basis.
Great, thank you for that. And then in the changes in your budget over the last few fiscal years, there's been a change in some of the contract services between year over year. So I'm just curious if you could speak to the new recommended expenditure for this fiscal year 21 compared to last year.
Sure. So I think a lot of that money is related to our recertification, the increase that you're seeing there. So we have had over the past, I want to say 2 years, we've had a lot of experience leave the department, mostly through retirement. We're kind of an aging department, and it's really hard to kind of replace that decade, 20 years, 30 years worth of experience when an employee goes. And so we've been shifting to, we've just started to have these conversations and start to do this, but we've been shifting towards bringing in more entry-level employees, but then also to try and kind of quickly get some of our more complicated work done, having some short-term contracts with people that have more experience but maybe aren't interested in working with the city full-time, to help us out a little to kind of cover that gap. With the end goal being that we will train up the new employees and eventually be self-sufficient again.
Thank you for that. And then just very quickly, I know we'll talk a lot about it over the course of this budget cycle, but the pilot, the payment in lieu of taxes, and I'm particularly grateful for our universities who have stepped up with some housing resources amidst this corona pandemic. Are you at the table sort of measuring the contributions those universities are giving and sort of equating it with the financial obligation? I'm curious if you are involved and if you could speak to that at all, if you are.
So up to now, I think this is something that, even though it was kind of long building, it still kind of caught everyone by surprise, and kind of the dramatic escalation caught everyone by surprise. And so the contributions that we've been receiving from universities and from hospitals right now have not been tied at all to their pilot obligations. They're not really obligations, the pilot requests that we make. They've kind of just been stepping up as good community members, and that has not been something where there's been any sort of back and forth, to my knowledge, as in terms of like a trade-off versus the pilot commitment we ask for and the services they're providing.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Chairman Bach. Thank you, Nick.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Sabi George. Next, I want to recognize Councillor Ed Flynn has also joined us from District 2. Next up is Council President Kim Janey, to be followed by Councillor Matt O'Malley, and then Councillor Ricardo Arroyo.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Nick. Just a couple of questions. One, the $2.6 billion, I guess, in revenue is the property tax. I remain concerned that so much of our city's budget is reliant upon property tax, 72%. Just to follow up on some of the questions that I heard from my colleague around pilot, that revenue, however, is just still based on 2009 assessed property values. Is that correct, Nick?
Good afternoon, Councilor. When you say the revenue from pilot, I just want to make sure we're talking.
So with the universities and hospitals, and very good to hear folks stepping up and being good neighbors during this crisis. But when we have our conversations around pilot and whether or not they are being good neighbors with their voluntary contributions, we often note that the assessed values that we're even asking these requests are based on old values in the city. And so I just wanted to get clear, when we talk about revenue coming in, this $2.6 billion through property tax, are we looking at current values or are we looking at old values? So that's the first question.
So the $2.6 billion that's projected would be based off of property values as of January 1st, 2020. So calendar year 19 values.
Yep, and I looked at one of the earlier slides from our earlier hearing in FY21. It looked like the new growth was 65. I don't know if you have that slide up. It is page 7. I know you didn't have a presentation here, but it looked at the property tax new growth. And pretty much from FY20, it was 99, and now FY21 is projected at 65. And I just wondered if you could talk about what that dip is.
Sure. So I think that, I think it's important when we're kind of projecting where new growth is going to be, that we do it in a conservative manner. And I think that's where budget was coming from in this instance. A lot of the information to kind of let us figure out where that final number is going to be is a big part of kind of what my department does over the next 5-6 months. Is work to kind of nail down where that number is and what value should be. And especially for new growth, which is primarily new construction, new acquisitions from personal property, and property that goes from exempt to taxable. So like expiring tax incentive agreements. I know last year in that 99 million number, there was $20 million from personal property value. That is extremely hard to kind of predict where that's going to go year to year. So that's businesses making investments and buying new things.
Yep. Let me ask a question related to that. So also in the slide deck, and I know you don't have it here, but we saw that there was an increase of 7% from FY20 to 21 in the revenue for property tax. And I wonder if you can speak to how much of that was new construction in terms of just getting new properties on the tax rolls versus property values going up. And then I had another question. Let me just get it in because I feel like I might be running short on time. I'm wondering if your department has a sense of how many property owners are paying their property tax through an escrow account with their mortgage lender versus directly to the city. So one, just looking at that 7% increase that we saw from fiscal year 20 to 21 in terms of property revenue coming in from property tax, how much of that was new construction and getting new property on the tax rolls versus property values going up, and then the assessing question on who's paying directly to the city versus who's paying through an escrow account through their mortgage lender. Thank you so much, Nick.
Yeah, no worries. So to answer the second question first, in terms of how many people are paying through an escrow as opposed to paying directly, unfortunately, that is information that I don't have. The department that handles that is actually our collecting department. That the collecting and treasury is where the money kind of goes to. People that take care of the bills. My department is really about setting the values that the bills are based off of. So that's just unfortunately not information that I have, and I'm not sure if that's data that they might have or they might not.
Yeah, just important with this question as we try to offer relief But obviously, we still need revenue, very important revenue. It represents 72% of our city's budget to continue to come in. And so finding that right balance of offering relief to people, but also understanding we certainly still need revenue to come in. But anyway, thank you so much. If you could get to the first question on
So the first question, were you asking about the increase, again, just to make sure that I understand, the increase from fiscal year 19 to fiscal year 20 in property tax revenue? Or are you talking about the projected increase from 20 to 21?
So from 20 to 21, it's pretty early in the slide deck that from the hearing we just had, we look at the property tax and it compares FY20 to 21, and we see the comparison is a 7% increase, unlike the excise tax, which we see is a decrease from 20 to 20, looking from at 21 compared to 20. So I have the screen up. I'm not going to bother to try to share it. If you don't have it now, we can figure it out after the fact.
I can give you a kind of general overview without speaking to the numbers because I don't have that data right in front of me. But there's kind of two drivers in new property tax revenue, and it's related to our overall levy. So there's this constitutional change that impacted property taxes and put Proposition 2.5 into place, and there are a whole bunch of laws that kind of fall under what Proposition 2.5 means. One of the things that Proposition 2.5 controls is the amount of revenue that the city can generate every year through property taxes. And so what that limit is the amount of revenue that you got last year plus 2.5%. And so then in addition to that, you can add new growth. And so that is what makes up the difference between the 2.5% increase in the prior year and the additional projected revenue for next year. It's a little, I can have more conversations with you about this if you like. It's kind of hard for me to kind of quickly summarize, and I feel like I might not be doing a great job of it. But in essence, there are kind of two components that go into our revenue every year. And one is you have this 2.5% cap that the city has always been at that cap every year since it was implemented in the 1980s. And then you have this additional bucket of new growth. And kind of the theory behind that is when these things got put into effect, they were concerned about city budgets going insane and cities requesting way more money than they need. And so now there's this whole system of overrides and essentially votes if you want to have the budget be over a certain amount. And the 2.5 is what kind of limits that initial barrier. And the reason new growth doesn't factor into that is because since it's a new thing that is generating revenue and not the kind of sustained tax base, it's kind of a way to acknowledge that the world is changing and it's not just the appreciation of property values that are already pre-existing.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Council President. I think that in terms of Justin's slide, that the 65 million of new growth makes up about 40% of the 161 that he was projecting. So it looked like, at least in the slides that Justin Starrett shared with us, it was sort of a 60-40 split, 60% year-on-year growth, 40% new growth. And I would just like to say to the Council President's point, I mean, it may be, depending on what we see happen after June 1st and all, that we may need in this process, President Janey, to have collecting Treasury come in and talk about receipts and what the sort of trends on that are, given that it's not assessing space. But thank you for those questions. Next, I'm going to recognize Councillor Matt O'Malley to be followed by Councillor Arroyo and then Councillor Mejia. Councillor O'Malley, you're muted.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commission, welcome. As you haven't been grilled by all of us in one place, my background hopefully will put you a little more at ease for what you're missing out. We look forward to doing it again in person soon. To follow up on the last question from the Council President and the Chair as it relates to new growth, I guess that was sort of the line of questioning with the earlier budget hearing. You know, the $65 million budget this year actually seems as though it's probably more on target than what we've done in years past. Last year, we actually did right around 65 million, and of course, the receipts came in about 99 million. So I guess my question to you is, do you think 65 of a new growth number, and a lot of our growth in our budget is based on that, is conservative enough to recognize the economic uncertainty that lays ahead?
Good afternoon, Counselor. I do appreciate the background. It adds some lovely context. It makes me feel more like a regular here. So thank you for that. I want to say that yes, I am comfortable with that 65 million number for the upcoming year. A lot of that is the fact that that is really looking at kind of the world as of January 1st. And the world as of January 1st is that things were under construction, we were moving forward, projects were continuing. I definitely have concerns about what is happening in the world right now. But a lot of that impact, I think the city is going to end up feeling in fiscal year 2022.
Okay. No, I agree on all those points. Secondly, I don't remember if it was Chief Handy or Director Sterrett, but at our earlier overview hearing, the question many of us asked, including myself, was on the deferral or the 1 month deferral for the fourth quarter property tax, and the concern that should that grow, will that represent a deficit in revenue? One of the prior administration folks said that we average about 99% of our property taxes a payment, which is phenomenal. I think that's probably as good as it's going to get. Do you know, given the fact that, to Council Flaherty's point, so many property taxes, including mine, come directly out of my mortgage payment, the escrow account pays directly to the city. Do you know what our percentage of collection is at this point for the fourth quarter?
I do not. So to preface this with that, just a little bit not my area.
That would be collection. That would be Drew Smith's shop.
Yep, that's
Okay.
Drew Smith and Celia Barton. But that being said, the property tax bills for the fourth quarter are normally due on May 1st.
Yeah.
So we're still kind of a couple of weeks away from the standard due date, never mind the extension that just got put into place. I was having some conversations, and I know that people have been paying. Some banks and escrow accounts, I believe, have been paying, but I just don't know how much compared to normal.
Okay, fair enough. We'll save that for Drew. And then the other thing that was talked about is pilot payments obviously have gone up. I think most of my colleagues and I believe that we need to have a better revaluation of that tax-exempt property so that number grows even higher. Yet there was a 121 ABC agreement, which is something that I wasn't too familiar with. It's my understanding from the earlier budget hearing. These are voluntary agreements that come with, is it other sort of private entity? Give me like a 30-second primer on what a 121 ABC agreement is and how it's different from a pilot.
Yeah. So, and there's a lot of confusion about kind of different programs that are related to taxes because they all can tend to have the same name by statute. It's very, very frustrating. And so a lot of times when I'm talking about pilots, I'm talking about the voluntary pilots, the universities, hospitals, cultural institutions that we ask for money based on task force recommendations, and they provide what they can. Right? There's another whole category of revenue that are actual contractually binding agreements. And so those are the 121A agreements, 121B agreements. Some of those are
Just give me like a brief, what would an example of a 121A or 121B agreement be?
So a 121A agreement is for blighted property. It's relates to an old designation. We have a whole ton of them that are affordable housing projects. And so in essence, it allows the project to kind of go through a different review process with the BPDA outside of regular zoning. And it's got a whole bunch of hoops that they have to jump through to get designated a 128 corporation, and there are a whole bunch of different elements. But then it allows for them to have kind of this special review process with the BPDA, and it also allows for the potential to enter into a tax agreement instead of paying normal taxes. And so we have a number.
It sounds to me that it's a good thing those are going down, because it almost sounds like a TIF type structure where by having fewer of those, we'll actually have a more dedicated and reliable revenue stream for the city.
Yes. So a big component of, maybe not a big component, but a component of last year's new growth was any project that is under that contract is exempt from property taxes. They pay the contract money instead. So when that contract terminates, that project becomes taxable under regular taxes, and then that new amount of regular taxes is counted as new growth, even though it's an old project. And so we had a number of 40-year-old agreements expire last year, and so those shifted to becoming taxable projects. And so that gave us an increase in our new growth number to kind of help get us to that 99 million number.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, my time is up. In closing, I wanted to welcome, obviously, Commissioner, great work so far. Particularly, I wanted to give a shout out to Laura Isberg and your team, who's been phenomenal for my staff and I. Obviously, these are sensitive questions, sensitive constituent issues whenever there's a tax question or outstanding issue. And she's been a tremendous resource. So job well done to her as well as the rest of your team. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Malley. Recognizing now Councillor Arroyo, to be followed by Councillor Mejia, Councillor Baker.
Hello, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Madam Chair. So a lot of the questions that I was thinking of asking have been asked, but one of my questions is, in terms of assessing the pilot payments, are there any plans to update, especially considering where we're going to be fiscally, I think, due to this virus, the property taxes of which we use to then estimate what their payments should be within this fiscal year?
So I think that's an important conversation to have. I think that the city's pilot program has actually been a pretty significant success if you benchmark it against any other state or municipality. We collect far and away more money than other localities do in this kind of voluntary system that's in essence fundraising, right? And so I think that one of the things right now that's kind of casting a shadow over that is that the way that this program was implemented, because it has this tie-in currently to these old property values, it kind of paints the program in a bad light, where it's really an excellent program. And so I am kind of interested in taking a look at those values and updating those metrics, not to say that institutions aren't paying what they should, because to be honest, the tax rate is also from fiscal year 11 as well, right? And so the tax rate's dropped 20% since then, because then it was $32 per thousand. But that's just kind of the framework of how the program was created. But I think that I'd like to kind of get some more information out there, so the program isn't giving this appearance that's trying to hide things, but really it's a strong revenue generator for the city, and I think it's been pretty successful, and I don't like that the values are kind of a distraction from that success.
Thank you for that answer. I think that's it for me right now. I'll get in touch offline for anything else that comes up.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Arroyo. Councillor Mejia, to be followed by Councillor Baker and Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just have a few quick questions in regards to just how accessible this information is to folks. Curious, the assessment department determines property values, right? So I'm wondering how does this impact poorer neighborhoods? Like, are you seeing this through a lens of equity? For example, through this deferrable program for seniors. Do you have a sense of how that breaks down by neighborhoods in terms of if we're seeing everyone across the city taking advantage of this, or are we seeing high concentrations in only certain pockets of the city? Just wondering how you're keeping track of the equity in that space.
Well, good afternoon, Councillor. That's a really interesting question. I do not have information kind of by locality on deferrals. I do think that would be interesting to look at. You know, our deferral program is, I don't know if it's underutilized, but it's really not utilized very much. And I do, so there could be a couple of different reasons for that, right? And any time you don't know why something is being utilized, it could be that we're not getting information out appropriately. It could be people don't meet the requirements of the program because there's age and income limits. There could be different reasons why that's happening. It could be that just people aren't interested in the program for whatever reason because they don't find it attractive. And I am interested in kind of trying to figure out more why that is, and trying to figure out how to get information out to people. I mean, right now we have information on our website, but we also participate in various community events. We work a lot with Age Strong to have people available to help them communicate the issue. We have our Taxpayer Referral and Assistance Center that I always encourage people to call if they have any questions about a program and think they might be interested. You know, there are a lot of times where I worked with the department for 14 years, right? And I just get all kinds of questions about exemption programs. And a lot of times what people ask is like, can I apply for this? My answer is like, always, you can apply for it. Like, why not apply? Filling out the application is free. You might not qualify, but if you don't send in the application, you'll never get it. So you have to do that first step. And our applications don't ask for that much information. And so I always try and encourage as many people as possible to apply for these programs because they're there for people to benefit from. And I want more people to benefit from them. That's why they exist.
So in regards to getting the information out, I'm just curious, I'm going to assume that it's in multiple languages, right? So that the information is getting out in different languages.
So that's a conversation that we've been having with the Language and Communications Access Department that was recently established to try and figure out what forms we have that should go out in multiple languages, because right now I think a few of our forms kind of have babble notices on them, but I don't know that they are widely available, at least not in hard copy in different languages. And so I think that's something that we need to look into.
And I'm not sure if this is in this department, and I know Councilor Bach will let me know if, as soon as I ask the question, if it should be deferred somewhere else. But I'm curious about when someone purchases a city property, and they have like a 30-year, I wouldn't call it a death penalty, but you know, you're supposed to be a homeowner. You're supposed to live in that rental property, for 10 years. It makes it hard for people to invest and purchase a home if they know that they're never going to be able to build any equity. And I'm wondering whether or not that's something that your department looks at, because I've gotten a lot of feedback from people who are interested in becoming homeowners, but the way the city assesses not just the property, but just the value of the home if you purchase a city property is lower. And maybe this is not the question for this hearing. I'm sorry that I just... Yeah,
no, so...
You know what I'm getting at?
I kind of get what you're getting at, and I trying to think of like who the best person that might actually involve like a few different departments. Mm-hmm. The one part of it that does kind of touch on assessing that can be some help with this is that when people purchase a property that has restrictions like that are built into the deeds, we take that into account in the value and we take that into account in the taxes. So we're not treating it as if it is something that is unencumbered, that someone can do whatever they want with. So it kind of keeps those costs low for them. But I hear what you're saying about, they don't have the ability to kind of create equity, and so that makes it less attractive. But I think that might, I'm not sure if it's neighborhood development or kind of who that falls into. That would be the best person to kind of answer why those guidelines are in place.
And then the last thing is it's about pilot, the payment in lieu of taxes compensation. There was a earlier hearing that we talked about. We have a lot of universities in the city of Boston who are not paying their fair share, and that we're losing, it seems like, a lot of revenue because of the way the property taxes are set up here in the city of Boston. So I'm just wondering if your department is looking at ways that we can make it more fair to push these folks to pay their fair share, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really interesting conversation. So a little background on that, right? When we're talking about these nonprofits and this pilot program, that's the reason it's voluntary is right now by state law, all of these institutions are completely exempt from paying property taxes. So their obligation for property taxes is zero, right? And that's not just Boston, that's the Commonwealth. And that's how the statutes are set up. And for the most part, I think over time this has been building and building. We've been doing some excellent outreach to try and get these institutions to acknowledge that they are members of our community and that there are costs associated with them being members. And that was kind of the impetus behind the task force when that was created, to kind of bring institutions together to address some of the funding needs of the city and get some buy-in. And that's kind of what created the current system that we have now that is quite successful. That doesn't mean that it can't be improved. I think one should always strive for improvement, and it can potentially be improved dramatically. And I think it's good to kind of have conversations about how to figure out how to make that happen. The thing that I want to avoid, though, is painting it as something that is a failure or not doing what it should just because it could be better. I don't think that because something can be improved upon means that what currently exists is a failure. And in essence, it's currently a fundraising operation in which we call people, we ask them to make money, we explain why we need the money, but it's really not even close to the same thing as property taxes, which are a legal obligation that these institutions just don't have because of their structure.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that is all. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mejia. Next up is Councillor Baker, to be followed by Councillor Edwards and then Councillor Breeden.
Thank you, Nick. Do we have a senior exemption?
Yes,
Or
sir.
is it just a deferral?
We have a couple of different senior exemption options. There's a 41C option and a 70D option. They have income requirements and age restrictions and asset restrictions potentially as well.
So is the senior exemption worth more than the homeowner exemption?
The senior exemption is not worth more than the homeowner exemption, but if you qualify for,
Can you have them both?
yes, you can have them both. So if you qualify for the senior exemption, you definitely qualify for the homeowner exemption.
So you would get them both automatically, or you need to do the you need to file for them?
So the senior exemptions are this category of exemptions that we call personal exemptions. Those, because of state rules, you have to file for every year. The residential exemptions, if for some reason you applied for a senior exemption and we're not getting a residential exemption, we need an application to have something to act on. So we would send you an application, but we would make sure that you were a member of both those programs.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Councillor Edwards.
Hi. Thank you again for being so responsive to us at this time. I just wanted to follow up on a couple questions. First, if we can get eventually if we can get an update on the back tax ordinance that was passed, I think in 2018. This was allowing for seniors to defer or to extend. This is an ordinance that myself and Councillor Flynn passed at the City Council as a local option to allow for seniors to extend their, if they owed money to the City of Boston, to extend the 1-year payment plan to a 5-year payment plan, and to also reduce their taxes or their interest rate by 50%. So we opted into that as the City of Boston, and we're just curious about how many seniors had taken advantage of that. We also had agreed at some point having a hearing on this specifically to discuss other classes of individuals who also may need relief, as we heard about people who are house rich but cash poor and are struggling to pay their property taxes to the City of Boston. So that was one. I don't know if you had any updates on that and population in terms of numbers. The other question I had was with regards to, one of the other questions and issues we're going to be dealing with in the hearing that Councillor Wu, myself, and Councillor Block have called is linking property tax relief to lowering rents. So if a property owner agreed to rent below market to, I don't know, whomever, but they agreed to go below market, especially in some of the housing markets that we are particularly in dire need of, like family housing. What property tax relief could the City of Boston offer them, if any, to incentivize people to do that? If they did the right thing, if they're already doing the right thing and renting well below market, why wouldn't we want to reward people with some sort of relief on the other end? And then finally, I know you've been having to field questions about the pilot program, but this is not so much a question about the income coming in. This is about, and I agree with you, it's a volunteer program. It is not a failure. I think it's seen as a national model, actually, in terms of cities being able to extract benefits from colleges and universities. So yes, but it could be better, as you mentioned. That doesn't make it a failure. I also think it could be accurate. And one of the things that we've asked for from your office is actually updating the numbers to demonstrate not the 2009 values, but today's current values, and demonstrating the actual delta between what they are paying and what they could be volunteering to pay. That was one thing we've been asking for some time. The other thing was actually noting or getting them as universities to report, and they did this before, their exempt properties and their non-exempt properties on their campuses. So how much tax relief they're getting or not getting for their Dunkin' Donuts versus the land that they've taken out of property tax relief. And also, we've called for, and I will continue to call for, which is a true community benefits analysis and a task force led by people of Boston to tell the universities what are the CBAs or community benefits that actually matter to the community, and give them a list and say, so when you're not going to pay us cash, but you are going to offer community benefits, choose from this list of 10 things. And these are all things, again, from the City of Boston and its leadership that I think that we should be considering, not necessarily whether they will pay or not. So those are the 3 buckets, or 3 things I had questions about.
Sure. Good afternoon, Councillor. So to your first point about the kind of tax repayment plans, that is not a program that my department administers, but I did have a conversation about this the other day because I was also curious. My understanding is that the law department has entered into 2 contracts, with individuals pursuant to that program. I might have lost the points now, I'm sorry. I know there's a question in there about pilots and updating values.
Before that, the connecting property tax relief with rent relief.
Oh, yes. So connecting property tax relief with rent relief. So right now, if someone decides to restrict their deed to limit their income, then that is something that we can take into account with their valuation. But failing a deed restriction, we need to value things based on what they can transact for in the market. And so that is kind of where you have this disconnect of property owners that might be providing below market rent to people out of the goodness of their heart, but the value is not taking that into account. And that it's how the statutes are set up that kind of dictate the parameters under which we value things. So that would need to be a statutory change, or they would have the opportunity to get an acknowledgement of that if they knew they were just going to do it forever and ever. If they put a deed restriction on their property, then we can put that into their values, because that clearly is something that would impact the marketability of their property.
But there couldn't be just a straight out, like you have a senior, or like you have a residential exemption, you have a senior exemption, you have certain percentages just reducing the assessed taxes. There couldn't be a certain percentage or a certain number that's just reducing their assessed taxes.
So, I mean, it's possible to craft a new statute to maybe get at what you're talking about in a similar way that the exemption statutes are crafted. But currently in the statutes, the way they exist, there's not an opportunity for us to kind of get at that. It would need to be a change to legislation.
Okay. And then the pilot, the accuracy component of the city role.
Yeah, so as I was mentioning earlier, I do think that having these old values are kind of a distraction for the program and tend to give it a black eye when it's not clear that it deserves one. And so that is something that I'm interested in updating, so that people have a better understanding of exactly what is happening out there.
There was also the CBA and defining community benefits agreements or community benefits period.
I'm sorry, the community benefits or CPA? Were those two different things, or?
My understanding of the pilot program is there's two ways in which institutions are assessed. They have the 12.5%, half can be paid in cash, half can be paid in community benefits.
Okay.
Right. So that list of what is defined as a community benefit, having a task force. I know the pilot task force has asked for this, that they would be part of helping to define what it is, so that when universities say that they've done right by us with community benefits, it's part of a list of already defined benefits that we know actually help our communities, just aren't assumed to by the universities.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. So right now, the program and kind of the way that it's shaped is around the task force guidelines that were issued back when those original 2011 values were used, right? And so as part of those guidelines, there was a cap on how much credit that communities could get for community benefits. Sorry, not communities, institutions could get for community benefits, and that 50% threshold. I'm sure if you've seen the reports that they send in that I believe are posted on the website, the vast majority of institutions desire a much higher credit level. We get calls every year asking if people can have a waiver and they can have a larger community benefit contribution and a smaller cash requirement put on them. And the response back to that is if the organization is interested in partnering with the city on a program that is a city priority that will directly reduce the amount of money that the city needs to expend on something, then that new program is something that we might consider for a community benefit reduction in the future. But otherwise, we are holding to the thresholds that were set in that initial kind of task force recommendation. As to whether there are conversations about a new task force, new community benefit kind of analysis and community involvement in that analysis, those are conversations that I've not been a part of. So I don't have a good answer for that. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, that is just something I think would be very helpful. And I think helping to define what is succeeding from the community perspective would actually, I think, demonstrate even a wonderful opportunity for a lot of the colleges and universities to at least meet in that need, and meet it wonderfully if it can be defined not just by how much money it saves the city directly with city services or whatever program, but also just how truly, honestly, the community would be excited about certain benefits coming from the universities. It doesn't compensate, I feel, for the cash payments, but I do think it would build a lot of bridges, and it would be a wonderful opportunity olive branch, if anything. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Next is Councillor Breeden, to be followed by Councillor Flynn.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much. This is a very interesting conversation. Many of my colleagues have already asked questions that I would have thought of. I had a particular question about, in the light of the fact that we have so many people who are housing rich, they own properties that have increased in value greatly, but they're cash poor. Could you speak to the senior work-off program and how that intersects with the assessing department, and also the equity of accessibility of that? Different neighbourhoods have more opportunities in the locality to avail of that program. Here in Alston Brighton, we have very few city institutions, with the library and the library and I think the library and the senior centre, I think, are the two. And I don't even think the library works, but you know, other neighbourhoods have more opportunities for low-income seniors to do a work-off program in their locality. So can you speak to that, please?
Sure, I can do my best. Good afternoon, Councillor.
Thank you.
So the work-off program is an opportunity for seniors to reduce some of their tax liability through volunteer work. It's actually a program that is administered by the Age Strong department. And so they're the ones that do the kind of application processing and the placement of those individuals. So I unfortunately don't have a lot of good information for you about kind of where people are placed, what departments they're placed in locality and things like that. I think it's a really interesting question. It's just kind of outside my wheelhouse.
Do you know how many folks then are eligible that would pay into the assessing, impact the assessing process? Or the payment? No, that's more collection. Sorry, I'm probably asking the wrong question completely.
No problem. There's a lot of overlap in departments. It can be. Yeah. I get confused about who does what. So. Yeah. Okay, I'll save that question for another time. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Breeden. Councillor Flynn?
Thank you, Councillor Block, and thank you, Commissioner, for being here and for your leadership. I had a couple questions. Wanted to follow on Councillor Breeden's question on the ability for seniors to do some volunteer work and have a reduction in their property tax. I support that. I think it's a great program. I think a lot of seniors are doing volunteer work already that they just don't know about the program, and that they would normally be eligible for the program. But is it possible we can do more outreach to seniors to let them know about the program?
With their tax bill.
Good afternoon, Councillor Flynn. Yeah, I think that is an excellent question, and outreach, as I was talking about earlier, is something that, you know, I think is really important to try and kind of figure out new ways to get constituents kind of involved and make them aware that programs are available. We do a lot now with community meetings and working with Age Strong, and I encourage everyone to call our Taxpayer and Referral Assistance Center, because they know a lot more about the details and the nitty-gritty of these programs than I do. But I'm always open to new suggestions for outreach, and we are kind of willing to do whatever it is, because I think these are important programs and they exist for people to take advantage of them. They don't exist to be kept secret.
Thank you. Another quick question. Tell me about the program for disabled veterans.
Sure. So we have a few different personal exemption options that apply to disabled veterans. The mayor recently, through his executive order, extended the deadline on those exemption programs. The application deadline was April 1st, and he's extended that to June 1st, which is the maximum allowed by the legislature, which I think is a great thing to give people an extra opportunity to apply. I would suggest anyone that is interested in that to call our Taxpayer Referral and Assistance Center. A lot of them are kind of dependent upon disability level, and there are different requirements there. And so they're probably in the best position they're all kind of person-to-person specific, so that to help put people in the right bucket and make sure that they're getting the largest exemption that they can get from those various programs.
Thank you. And my final question, I supported the program where during this pandemic, the colleges, universities were giving dorm space to our first responders so that they could use them. I know there's one in my district that in Council Box district, there's Suffolk University that's doing the program. I know other colleges and universities are doing it as well. I know some other colleges may or may not open on time in the fall and maybe not have summer classes, but I'm just wondering what impact do these decisions have on your bottom line of collecting revenue for the city, knowing that our colleges are struggling financially? Most of all, our colleges already are providing services now as part of this pandemic. Are you factoring that in, and what impact will that have?
So that's an excellent question. I am concerned with the potential impact to the receipts for the second half of our pilot requests. We have not sent out those notices yet, so I don't really know where that's going to land. We're going to send those out in the next few weeks. I think it definitely has the potential to hit us, because I know that there are a lot of layoffs happening right now with universities and medical institutions. And again, it being a voluntary program, I know if they're like, just to tie it to a normal household, normal household, the first bills that you cut are the ones that you don't have to pay, right? And so I think that there might be some impact there. I really hope that there isn't. I know that the participants that we have that really are partners with us know how important that revenue is to the city and how vital that is. And the same way that they've been stepping up to handle this crisis, I hope that they will continue to step up and participate in that program. Thankfully, as far as I know, no one has been trying to leverage their goodwill to ask for a discount during this emergency and this global pandemic. And so everyone that has been stepping up because they think that it's important to help the community and help Boston. And I think that that's important that we all kind of stand together to get this resolved.
Yeah, thank you. I acknowledge the tremendous work their colleges and universities and hospitals are doing during this pandemic. I also wonder and concerned too, because their revenue will be going down, that this will have a dramatic impact on the ability of Boston to bring in the pilot funds. So just something maybe short term and long term we could at least continue talking about.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important suggestion.
And thank you for your leadership. We appreciate everything you're doing.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Thank you, Commissioner. We will go to a second round of questions for folks who still have them. I wanted to follow up with a few of my own in relation to the info that you guys sent over. I guess one question is if you could walk us a little bit through overtime for the assessing department, because I noticed that last year we appropriated for that. I think it's 20,000 for that purpose, and then it's ended up being more like 40 by March 31st, and then the current budget contemplates 20,000 for next year, but that's a reassessment year. Is that realistic? Like, I just would love to sort of understand how you think about overtime for the department and what's driving that.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It probably delves a little bit into the nitty-gritty of the department. So feel free to cut me off if I'm giving too much detail. We had some kind of untimely transition last year. And so with the kind of moving on of the former commissioner, and we had to make a change with our director of evaluation. When I took over in June, we were, and I don't think this was by design, we also had some issues with software conversion, but we were behind where we needed to be. And so to get us kind of in line to make sure that our values got approved last year and certified on time and that bills went out appropriately, that our overtime costs. And it was also kind of making up for some of the staff shortfall. Since then we've